for any of you who have stories to tell about your experiences with Bryna as well.
So I'm Gail Cheever, and I'm Bryna's friend, but I'm also her biographer. And I'm also her archivist, because Bryna and I have been going through all of her photographs and all of her memorabilia, and I've been scanning a lot of it into an archive called Bryna Kullgren, so that she can share it with her whole family, because many of them live back in the East Coast. So we're going to launch her birthday, which is September 27th, today. And so she's going to be celebrated from now until the end of the month. Okay?
Yes.
All right, that's the way to do it. Well, it all started on September 27th, 1918 in Buffalo, New York. She was the first child of Isaac Cernovsky and Beulah Amberg. And then they had 4 more children after that. And what is really wonderful, Bryna's the oldest, she's 100. Bob, the youngest, is 92, still hale and hearty, and he lives in Maine. And he sent his birthday wishes to her. He wished he could have come, but you can imagine getting on an airplane with hurricanes going on is not an ideal thing to do. So let's start with Bryna's name, okay? You know, her name really does define her, so let's spell it. B, as in bossy. Brave and bold. Wouldn't you say that describes Bryna?
Yes.
Okay. R as in resilient, and you see, to be 100 years old, you have to be pretty resilient, right? And Y, young at heart. Bryna is one of the youngest people I know. She thinks young, and so that's a wonderful thing about her. N as in independent. She is so independent. And A as in amusing, audacious, and adventurous. So, when she was born, her father was a very noted ophthalmologist in Buffalo, New York. And he and his wife traveled all the time, so Bryna and her brothers and sisters were taken care of by servants and nannies. And the first real trial in Bryna's life was in 1926 when she was 8 years old. Her father died. And for a time there, it was very difficult, and her mother had a terrible accident, broke her leg. So Bryna's grandmother, Amberg, had to come and take care of these 5 children, all under the age of 8. She wasn't very happy about that. So one day she said to all these little kids, "Who wants to go for a ride in the motor car?" And of course, kids all wanted to go for a ride in the motor car. It was a ride, all right. She packed them off to a boarding school and left them there. And Bryna, being Bryna, took care of her brothers and sisters while they were at that school, which to Bryna seemed like years. But we know it was a few months before their mother was recovered and they were back home. And you want to know how I know that she was back home within months? Because Bryna was telling me a story about how she took her little brother Bob, who at that time was a year old, and she wheeled him down to the park in Buffalo so they could see Colonel Lindbergh fly over. And I thought, that's quite a story. So I checked. After Lindbergh made his historic flight across the Atlantic, he toured the United States starting in July and through October. And one of the places that he landed was Buffalo, New York in August of 1927.
Wow.
And so Bryna and her little brother were there to see Colonel Lindbergh fly over. Wow. So, because of the Depression and things, her mother was forced to sell the family properties and things. It was very difficult. She had to go back to work. And Bryna spent most of her childhood taking care of her 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And that's how she got the name Bossy Bryna. They still call her Bossy Bryna. At least Bob does, doesn't he? So, the next significant time period, I think, is in 1936. Bryna was a senior in high school. She went to Bennett High School in Buffalo, New York. And I have her diploma. It's like this big. It's really amazing. She also met John Kullgren when she was a senior in high school. She was working at LL Burger, which was kind of the Bronx of Buffalo, New York, you know, or Wilds, if any of you are Bakersfield people. And he worked at a gas station. He was an older man, wasn't he, Bryna?
He was 8 years old.
Yeah, he was 8 years older. And so they dated for about 5 years, and by that time, of course, the war had started. And he wanted to get married, but he wanted to wait until after the war, just in case something happened. I'm sure some of you experienced that. And Bryna said, well, that's fine, but I'm going to continue to date other people. And she did. She dated his cousin, John Hanson. Poor John. Well, it didn't take John Kullgren very long to change his tune. So in August of 1942, he called Bryna to come to New Jersey. First he called her to come to Miami to meet him there, and then he called her back and said, oh, well, they're moving me to New Jersey, so meet me in New Jersey. And they met in New Jersey, and they eloped. She, of course, had spent her entire childhood as an adult taking care of other kids. She didn't think she needed to ask anybody's permission to do anything, so she just did it, right? She's lived her life pretty much that way. So in 1942, John was in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was a mechanic, and they sent him to Williams Field in Chandler, Arizona. And Bryna followed him. And what she told me was she worked as the world's lousiest waitress for a bit. Then she worked at JCPenney, and by that time, they deployed John to the Philippines for the rest of the war. And she went back home to Buffalo, went back to work at LL Burger, and lived with her mother. So, after the war, or at the end of the war, John came home on a hospital ship and reunited with Bryna back in Buffalo. And at that point, they decided, let's move to Los Angeles. So they got the car, and off they went. Probably, were you camping along the way when you were driving to LA?
We stopped and visit friends, remember?
Oh yeah, she stopped to visit friends in Mesa, Arizona. And while they were there, John got an offer of a job working for the United States Post Office in Mesa. So they decided, okay, we'll just stay here. And they did, and Bryna went to work for O.S. Stately in Chandler and Phoenix. And they hired her to be the office girl in the machine shop. And the reason that they put her there is they couldn't find anybody who would work with the boss there. He was real crotchety and cranky, and the only person who got along with him was Bryna. So she said she learned more about nuts and bolts and hardware and cold rolled steel than she ever wanted to know in her whole life while she worked there. So what they did, they were there about 5 years, and they decided to put in, they wanted a transfer to LA, because that's where they intended to go. Well, they were offered a transfer to Bakersfield. So they decided, well, that's close to Los Angeles, so we'll go there and then maybe we'll work our way to Los Angeles. Well, here she sits, she's still in Bakersfield. And John worked for the post office in Bakersfield for 30 years, and he had a downtown route in the residential area just in West Downtown. And he retired in 1980. Bryna first went to work for Brooks, didn't like it much. So she found another job. How many of you were in Bakersfield in 1951? I was. Okay. Well, at that time, Sears and Roebuck was at the corner of 19th and L Street downtown. And Bryna went over, and she was hired there to work in customer service. They had her run the PBX for a time. Were you good at running that PBX?
It was horrible.
Oh, okay. And then they moved her into unit control, which is like purchasing for the whole store. And she was there until Sears moved to the new Valley Plaza Mall in 1967. And she worked there until she retired in 1981. in unit control down in the basement. And what you need to know is that nobody knows her as Bryna Kullgren there. They called her Susie. So she's Susie Kullgren when she worked at Sears. Okay? Is that right?
Yes.
Susie. It even says it on the award they gave her, Susie Kullgren. We need to get her name right. So Cully, they always called John Cully because there were so many other Johns. Cully and Bryna were married for 51 and a half years. And they traveled the world and they made friends wherever they went. And here in Bakersfield, there were two other couples they were especially close to. That was Vern and Maud Oldershaw, who are aviation pioneers. They're amazing people. And Dorothy and Keith Thompson. And they had over 40 years of fun together, traveling and just getting together and socializing and having a great time, watching the kids grow up and all of that kind of thing. Bryna and Maud were especially close. They even shared a September 27th birthday. And what I told Bryna was that she and Maud were they were friends by heart and sisters by soul. They were an amazing team of two wild, crazy women, right? Okay. So Cully, after Cully died in 1994, Bryna continued to live in their home over on Ellen Lane. Robin Lane? I hate to tell you this, but the address was Ellen Lane. I told you I knew you better than you knew yourself. Okay, all right. And so what she did was she tutored in the schools, reading to children, and she became friends with the Hobart Barnes family at that point. That's how she met Dick, and that's how she knows Gretchen. Gretchen was the first classroom that Bryna worked in to reading to children and help. And so the Hobart Barnes family adopted Bryna. And so she watched their children grow up and has been friends with them ever since. She also worked manning the front desk at the volunteer center. And from what she told me, she pretty much directed traffic and kept everybody entertained, right? Okay, for 12 years. And the best story out of that whole experience is that when she turned 94, all of her colleagues at the volunteer center said, "So, where do you want to go to celebrate your birthday?" And she said, "Hooters." They weren't quite sure if she was serious, but she was serious, and you'll see when you see the pictures, there are pictures of that party there. And she actually asked to have the cook come out because she wanted to ask him why he wasn't wearing a pair of those shorts and that tight t-shirt. So it was a grand party, a memorable party. In 2003, Bryna moved to Carriage House. She is the person here who has lived here the longest, since 2003, okay? So, she's been here a long time, but she's still the Bryna that all of us have known through her, knowing her. She's still bossy, she's still resilient, she's still young at heart, she's still very independent, and she is absolutely still audacious. And she has two things to tell you, her words of wisdom when she becomes a centenarian, she has for you. It's not how many years, it's how much fun you have. And old age ain't for sissies, right? So you all have to remember that. So that is Bryna Kullgren's life.
Oh, wonderful.